Yeah, let's go ahead and call the meeting to order. It's Wednesday, May 12th, 2021, and at 6 o'clock, and we have a work session tonight regarding our budget. Let's start out with, do we have any public comments on non-agenda items this evening? I see a phone number. I don't see anybody raising their hand. The mayor's here. We're just looking at public comments on non-agenda items, Mayor. So I'll let you take it away.
Hey, Vice Mayor, I heard you too. And it sounds like we don't have anybody coming in. And we didn't have anybody sign up or anything. Is that right, City Clerk?
No one signed up early.
Okay, well, I bet everyone would like to just get right into the work session then so that we can move through it and move on. And so let's do that.
We need to do roll call.
For a work session? No. Looks like everyone's here. That's okay, Councilmember Cumby. It's good to check in and see who's here, but I think just about everybody's here. Is there... I should say that I did hear from Councilor Harrington, and he probably won't be here. So if he pops in, then he's here. Otherwise, you know, he let me know.
And Mayor, Councilor Schuster is in the chambers. Did you hear that? He's just having some technical difficulties, but I think he can hear us and see us on the TV screen.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Vice Mayor. So he can hang in there. Hopefully we can get a chance to get his microphone or whatever fixed in case he wants to chime in on anything.
It would just be his laptop, right? That he might be having some difficulty with?
That's correct.
Probably.
It works great. It's just the laptop.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, then you're able to hang in there with us, Councilor Schuster. You won't have any trouble participating in the meeting then. Councilor Gabriel, I think I saw you say something, but I didn't hear you.
No, I was fine. I was just wondering, Councilor Stalder, I guess, is another one.
Oh, thank you. And I haven't heard from her, so my guess is she'll show up. Sure. She'll be here when she can be here. She tends to let you know if she's not going to be around. Appreciate you pointing that out. Well, I think we better get started. I think those council members will show up when they can. And I'm sure the city manager has everything ready to go for us. So why don't we start the work session on this portion of the budget?
Good evening, Council. I wanted to start off tonight with this being our second work session for the operating and maintenance budget review. With just some follow-up from last night, we did have a couple of questions from Council that we thought we would bring you back some additional information to start off tonight. So I think what I'll do first, if it's okay, is Malia had prepared to talk a little bit more about the professional and consulting dollars recommended for allocation in the general accounts budget. Here's your page number references while Malia gets her microphone off mute and ready to go. We are working on page 52. Sorry.
52.
52, thank you. And then you'll see on page 38 and 9 some additional detail that Malia will cover with you regarding operating supplementals in that cost center. So, Malia?
Excuse me, since it was Councilor Stalder, I think, who raised the question, and she's not. Oh, there she is. She's here. Never mind. Sorry.
Okay, that would have been a great point, Councilor Ozardi. Thank you.
Okay.
I told you she'd be here unless she let somebody know, so here she is.
Okay.
Councilor Stalder, yeah, sorry, City Manager. Would you like to hear some information from your question last night regarding the budget for contracted services?
I would love to. Thank you. I'm glad I'm here. Sorry I'm late.
That's where we're at. No, you came right on time. You weren't late at all. You arrived precisely when you should have. Go ahead, City Manager. Thank you. Sorry.
So, thank you. I'll let Malia take it from here. But we wanted to give you some more information on your question, Councilor Stalder.
So, Mayor and Councilor Stalder, you know, the budget was a little over $1 million, $1.1 million, and it's a combination of a lot of accounts rolled up into that summary, and the majority of that budget is really for the warm property and liability insurance of about $550,000. And there is also a placeholder for the gel agreement because I didn't know how much we were going to have to pay for that. That's about $130,000 at this point, just as an estimate in the budget. And we also have other things going in there, like our audit cost for the general fund. We have printing cost, and we also have the county property tax that we have to pay a 1% fee to the county, and then we have to also pay property tax. So that's, I mean, we do have consulting in there also, professional consulting. We've spent about $20,000 outside the audit just for the Thrive. So that kind of explains, there's a lot more accounts, but they're little dollars. But I'm trying to just give you the bigger ones that were in there. Does that answer your question, or do you need more information?
It does. Thank you. I really appreciate the breakdown. You guys know how much I love consultants. So that makes me feel a lot better about that whole thing. So thank you.
Okay. All right.
Unfortunately for me, it generated yet one more question. Did I hear you say something about property tax? Now, I understand the fee for property tax, but we're not paying property tax on other properties.
We are paying property tax on properties that are marketable. So things like Crystal Court and things that you market for sale are property tax.
They get you coming and going.
Yeah.
All right. I really appreciate that follow-up too, because I think I was part of that little question last night as well. So if I understood that, there's a whole bunch of things that fit under that umbrella of contractual services, and we don't always hit what we budget for, which is a good thing, because that means we've some efficiencies or savings in some of the different services that we're paying for, or we didn't use a consultant or an outside advisory source on a project necessarily last year, but we might for the next year. And that's how a lot of that shakes out.
Correct.
All right. Any other questions on this contractual service thing from any other members of the council? Really appreciate the staff getting back to us on that. I hope we didn't provide the impression that, we were full of anxiety or anything about it. I think we just wanted to get a little more information because of the difference between the two numbers in the columns.
Right.
Anything else? Councilor Stalder, I think is okay. Can't tell if you're reaching to unmute or what.
Well, I had to move my camera because the cat kept knocking it over. It's like hazards of zooming from home. So
yes.
No, thank you so much for answering the question.
All right. At the risk of being inappropriate, Council Member Cat Butt is there as usual, which is fine. All right. Well, let's keep going then, I guess, huh? And did you have some other follow-up stuff for us, City Manager? Great.
Mayor, I do. I believe it was Councilor O'Doherty, and I'm going to send you all this by email. I just received it last night from Finance, but she had asked about our compensation breakdowns. And so we had looked at, if you want to, I'll give you a page number reference. We had looked at numerous charts that show what personnel costs are as a percent of overall budget across funds and throughout departments. And so we did break out for you what compensation or personnel entails. I'm sending you a spreadsheet to that effect, but I will share those numbers with you. So across all funds of the city and all personnel expenses, our benefits are about, well, first of all, the entire amount of wages that we pay is $19.3 million per year. That's about 70% paid out in wages. Then our benefits portion is $6.8 million per year, or 25% of all those personnel costs you see. And then our taxes, really payroll taxes, amount to about $1.4 million, or 5%. In total, our personnel costs across all funds, so this is general fund, recreation center, water, wastewater, solid waste, amounts to about $27.4 million per year.
Thank you.
And that percentage, 70% wage, 25% benefits, and 5% taxes, is fairly consistent across all funds, although it will deviate a bit by a percent or two. For instance, in the recreation center, the Wages are a little higher at 79%, benefits a little lower at 16%. And the reason for those deviations, if you're wondering, is that we have a lot more part-time staff in the recreation center personnel operation. And so those part-time staff have no benefits, basically. So you see benefits go down relative and proportionate to wages going slightly up over full-time benefited staff. So that was the second follow-up from last night. Like I said, you have that in your inboxes. If you have any other questions, you're welcome to email me or anyone here, and we'll make sure to make that information available to you. Oh, I didn't send, sorry. I got the email ready, and I didn't hit send. I'm so sorry. You'll have it soon. Anyway, then you can look at it in a little more detail. Okay, and then, Mayor, I did have two other follow-ups, but I think we'd probably be best able to address those if we just work them into the presentation as we go. So, for instance, in HR, Director Curry is going to address some of those issues that came up last night.
All right. No, that sounds good.
Okay.
And
so,
HR
our
Director
agenda.
Curry, oh, no, go ahead. Go ahead, City Manager. I was just saying, it's great that she's here. We haven't seen or heard from her for a while.
That's right. So this is what your agenda for tonight looks like. We're going to wrap up our departmental overviews with Public Works, then Administrative Services, and finally we'll conclude with Human Resources. So we really only have 3 department or divisional level entities to look at. And then we're going to move into our enterprise or our proprietary fund. So we'll take a quick look at Utility Fund, Operations and Maintenance, which includes water and wastewater. And then we'll move to solid waste, and that'll round out the evening. And then we'll provide some updates as far as what the next steps would look like for us. We were talking internal to staff today, and I'll just let you know, I had scheduled this such that I thought we could get through all of this material tonight. If we do get through this, then we won't need our Wednesday, May 12th work session. And I would present as well that depending on the number of budget amendments we receive from Council, it is possible we might not even need a special meeting on Wednesday. If the number of budget amendments is very small, then perhaps we could just do a quick special meeting on Tuesday prior to or after your regular meeting. So we plant that seed with you, and then we'll see how much progress we make tonight.
Okay, great.
So, good. With that, Mayor, I'll move into our first department. We have the Public Works Director with us this evening. And of course, Malia Brown, as our Chief Operating Officer, works with Brooks Webb, our Director, and oversees that function. They're going to look at the Public Works budget. It starts on page 62 and 65. I'll give you a quick overview of those pages as they get ready to talk about the goals and accomplishments. And actually, I'll let them take off with goals and accomplishments because I accidentally closed down my budget material. So you guys work on goals and accomplishments, and then I'll come back with a quick overview of the recommended budget.
Okay, no problem, Janine. Honorable Mayor, City Council, the Public Works General Fund includes 4 divisions. The first division is the Public Works Administration. The Administration Division provides administrative leadership, clerical support, services, and capital project administration. We also provide support to City Council, Traffic Commission, and Monolith Ranch Advisory Committee. The administration section is basically 2 people. It's me and my administrative assistant. Accomplishments for fiscal year 21 is we started the construction of the Municipal Operations Center. We've included renewable energy specifications in multiple projects, and we bid and awarded new vehicles with idle reduction technology and hybrid models. We acquired grant funding, MRG, for the 15th Street Rehabilitation Project, which you recently awarded that contract for. And we continued working with staff on capital project prioritization, which I think is really an ongoing works for us. Our objectives for next year are to complete the construction of the Municipal Operations Center North Campus, continue to seek more grant funding to help supplement the budget where we can, and continue researching ways to reduce carbon emissions with city operations. The engineering division makes up 6 people. As you heard yesterday, we're going to be adding 2 from the GIS side are going to be coming over this year. But currently there's 6 folks in the engineering division. Their responsibilities include the design and construction of most capital improvement projects within the city. They handle all our traffic engineering, storm drain engineering, and floodplain administration. They also assist with development review function from a public works standpoint. Some of their accomplishments for last year was with the SPT funds. They, through projects, we replaced 7,900 feet of pavement, 1,800 feet of curb and gutter and sidewalk, and enhanced our PCI and addressed ADA concerns on those projects. We finished the construction of the 22nd and Reynolds Street signal, and the engineering division continues to work with YDOT on the signal at Flint and 3rd Street and Bill Nye. One of the things that engineering did last year on some of the projects was we really emphasized recycling and reuse of materials where we could. We either recycled or reused 6,600 tons of asphalt, 960 tons of concrete, and over 125 tons of steel metal through different projects. Objectives for 2022 for engineering is really we're focusing on right now on construction projects, and we've got some big multi-season projects that we're doing. The Reynolds Sewer, North Side Tank, and then of course the Wyoming Avenue and West Laramie Storm Drain project that's under design right now. For our street division, our street folks, they handle the maintenance of the street itself. They do our snow and ice removal. They handle the maintenance of the street signs, traffic signals, street lights, street sweeping. They handle the upkeep on the gravel roads and also take care of all the pavement markings on city streets. Some of their accomplishments for 21 was they continued to place reclaimed asphalt base on gravel roads in West Laramie, installed inlets and storm pipes in West Laramie to help aid in drainage in many of the areas over there, and continued to phase out old style signs and combine signs to clean up the downtown and different intersections. I don't know if you've noticed, we've eliminated a lot of signs by combining street signs and stop signs and that basically onto one pole, which has really helped clean up a lot of the signs around town. The street department for 2022 continues to apply base material to gravel roads. And we're hoping by the end of calendar year 2022 that we will have hit all roads in West Laramie with base material. They're going to continue to address drainage issues in West Laramie. And
that almost deserves repeating. Brooks.
We're shooting for by the end of 2022 to hit all, to be done with all the roads as far as adding or placing base material on those roads. The street division has been working really hard the last couple of years to get that done. We get a few done every year, and our goal is by the end of next construction season to be there on that.
That's good to hear. That's good to hear, and I'm guessing the Ward 1 council members are very keen to hear that as well, along with the rest of that. Sorry to interrupt. Go right ahead.
No, you're fine. The last division under the General Fund for Public Works is our fleet division. They maintain 130 vehicles and 180 pieces of equipment. They do this with 4 people. It's kind of amazing, actually. They'll one day they may be working on a fire engine and the next day on a lawnmower, but they keep up on all our maintenance needs, and they've done a great job the last couple of years of keeping a lot of the maintenance in-house and not having to send that out to other vendors. They also, the fleet division also is a big part of speccing and bidding new vehicles and equipment. They work with all departments across the city when new equipment is needed to make sure that they get the right sized equipment. They've been doing a lot of research on carbon emission solutions for vehicles, and they continue to work on that. And we plan on fully implementing idle reduction technology on all new units going forward. It's been pretty successful between the idle reduction and the hybrids on pickup trucks and cars. Basically, at that level, it's been great, and our fleet division continues to work toward that. So that's the goals and objectives for those 4 divisions within the General Fund of Public Works. Janine, did you want to go back over that other section?
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind, Council. So Brooks just covered really pages 63 and 64. If we want to skip back up to page 62, we'll look at the recommended expenditures for Public Works. As Brooks mentioned, we do have 4 functional areas or cost centers within Public Works. You'll see that overall, really, I'm recommending very little, frankly, no change. In that budget, we're expecting a $5,536,667 budget or expenditure close to that budget this year. Next year, the budget just deviating by a few $1,000 to $5.65 million being recommended. The pie charts sort of show you the breakdown by divisions. You can see the lion's share of our Public Works budget goes to the yellow section or to the street department, with 3 of that $5.65 million going there. Very small amount to administration, engineering, the next largest user of Public Works dollars at 34%, and fleet. As Brooks said, they do an amazing amount of work with 4 people, and really only being 8% of our entire Public Works budget. It's pretty phenomenal what they are able to accomplish. By spending category, as is typical in our operating and maintenance budgets, that blue section, personnel, is 41% of all expenditures for Public Works. A little lower personnel expenditure in this department simply because we have a lot more capital projects in this department, which you would expect for a Public Works operation. The yellow section showing you about 39%, or just roughly about the same amount as we spend on personnel, we spend on capital projects, major equipment, and studies. The studies typically are in your engineering division, and probably the notable study that you're all familiar with, it's been a multi-year effort, and I think will conclude or nearly conclude in fiscal year 22, is the Stormwater Comprehensive Master Plan for the entire city, which should be hopefully getting wrapped up and come to fruition here very soon. A pretty arduous endeavor that engineering has undertaken, and it's required a number of years to complete. So that's kind of the quick overview of Public Works. Holding the line on budget for the most part, certainly holding the line on personnel.
Yeah, I want to say that the City Council certainly doesn't have an expectation about this, but we do like to hear from Public Works, as we regularly do, about ways that have been found to save money, come in under budget, stay right on budget, and we consistently hear about that. I think it's fair to say we appreciate it, we note it, and comes back to us at budget time like this when we get to look at this and say, yep, we're all well within there. So we do appreciate it. We recognize it all year, and here's where it really pays off, is when we say, okay, well, we're staying within our budget. I'm a little worried about how we've budgeted out for the next couple of fiscal years. Next fiscal year, why don't we just limit it to that? And we've talked about this a lot, so I don't want to go down that road, just with the fact that we don't know what materials and some of the associated prices are going to do. And so we're just curious if, I guess I'm just curious if we need to try to plan for some sort of contingency in this budget because of the crazy costs. And I guess you guys would say, Council, we need to plan for contingency if you thought so. But I wonder if it's something that is, we have some budget adjustment meetings based on some external funding that we might be receiving or are going to receive here. If that's something that we should expect or think about.
Mayor, yes, I think that's a fair statement. We do expect that there's a high likelihood of seeing infrastructure money come through state and federal sources, in addition to the $4.99 million we're expecting from the most recent American Recovery Plan allocation. And so that's something that we've been talking about, myself, Malia Brooks, as far as preparing for potential infrastructure money through some kind of federal appropriation, and also the potential for federal grants. You're correct that prices are escalating right now fairly rapidly for materials and labor related to major public works kinds of projects. And of course, we talked about that quite a bit last month with our capital budget review. I guess what I would say is we certainly always have reserves, and we always have the ability to reprioritize projects or to push them out in time. For instance, maybe we've scheduled a project to occur in 2014. Sometimes we may have to push that out to 2015 if prices escalate and we don't have sufficient resources. So we're trying to remain nimble and deal with the changing in prices as well as the potential for new revenue as it comes, and have sort of plans on the shelf ready to go to address those issues and spend those monies if they come our way.
And I know that I've been revisiting that topic a lot, and I don't mean to harp on it. It just seems like a concern. And I appreciate that outline there, because I anticipate that we'll probably have to end up using some of those strategies. But we'll see. I see Malia might be wanting to add to that discussion. You're welcome to. You don't have to unless you have something you want us to hear.
Mayor, I just wanted to add that, I think we're managing it at this point. I mean, we've rejected a bid, we're accepting a bid, we're looking at every bid, and I think we're making management decisions to not have to have a contingency at this point. It may get there, but at this point, I don't see that we need to have contingencies or extra money in the budget. I think that we're managing the projects at this point.
And there's nothing that would prevent us, right, Malia, Janine, Brooks, in the future, if infrastructure dollars are directed our way, there's nothing that would prevent the council from saying we're going to go back in, do a budget amendment, and create this contingency reserve for some of these projects because we're having trouble. We can always do that.
We can either, and if not a contingency, we might say we're going to allocate these funds to a specific project that went over. It could be, projects that we want to do sooner. There's all sorts of strategies we can do, and we are going to look at that with the rescue plan monies. So, or see if council will look at some of that stuff. So,
I appreciate that. As an individual member of the council, I hope this is just one of those things that I'm worried about, that I'm having anxiety about, that doesn't really come to much down the road, and we don't need to worry about it. But it does concern me. So I appreciate the time on that. Thanks. And council, I appreciate your patience as I once again ask questions about that topic. Vice Mayor?
Yeah, I just want to say I'm really excited that the stormwater drainage plan is all coming together, and we will be seeing it soon. We've heard about it for a while. I'm very supportive of looking at the city more holistically, and I'm just anxious to give it a read. I hope it's not a couple hundred pages and all in engineering speak, but yeah, I think it'll be great to get that. So that's it for me.
No, it's good comment. You heard it, staff. Councilmember Pierce Vice Mayor Pierce needs some more reading material. The more complicated, the better. She's ready to tackle it. But I totally agree. I think we're all glad to see some of those things start to roll out and see some of those improvements start to be made. When we get back to a point where we're having ward meetings and running into our constituents and the grocery store or whatever, those are the kinds of things that it's really concrete to be able to say, hey, you know what? This is going on. This is what's happening over here. And that's going to be a good thing for you. Anybody else for this portion? I see Councilmember Somerville.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to give Brooks and his department kudos the improvement in the roads in West Laramie has been just tremendous over the last 5 years, and I think it's greatly appreciated by the residents out here. So I appreciate the dedication to that and continuing efforts. So thank you.
Hear, hear. Yeah, that's a good comment, and absolutely right. And I think it's also part of this, Councilor Somerville, as you heard, kind of an integrated group of projects that's coming along that will kind of build on some other things that will hopefully be a long-term, long-lasting approach to transportation and roads out there. What else? Anybody else have anything for this portion of the budget? It's a good time to ask questions. Councilmember Gabriel.
Just one for Brooks, if I could.
Yes, please.
Thanks, Mayor.
Yep.
Brooks, you piqued my interest when you talked about recycling. I was wondering about the projects at the university, for instance, Weil Hall and all of that material. Is that a positive for the city? What happens to all that materials? Is it going into the landfill, or where does that go?
Councilor Gabriel, through you, Mayor, the majority of the materials coming from that project are not coming to us. We do get a little bit at the landfill, materials that there's not necessarily a recycling market for, but most of the that building, as you know, is rock concrete, and they did reuse that material, so they crush it up and they sell it. I don't know where they sold it, but the majority of the stuff that came out of that building was recycled, and that's been something that the university's been doing, and the school district also. When the school district took down the old high school, much of that material was crushed and reused, and we got very, very little at the landfill from that project and others.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. Good questions. Anybody else have anything they want to add, or should we move a little further on into the work session and we'll ask questions later? Looks like that's where people are at. So let's go to wherever we are going next.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. Council, I would just offer to you and also to the public who might be listening, Brooks touched briefly on the street division using a salt brine pre-treatment for our roads in advance of snowstorms. And I wanted to let you know that when you get your payroll newsletter, this document, there's a really great article that I asked streets to provide to all of us, just talking about how they developed that brine solution and the equipment to apply it to the streets and some of the costs associated with it. The reason for that is they really were pretty innovative here, and they sort of created this homegrown system for creating and applying the brine, and it comes at a much cheaper cost than a lot of the other treatments that we use. So go ahead and check out your payroll newsletter. If you have any questions, I'm sure that Brooks or Street Division will be happy to answer them. I just wanted to point it out because I think it's super cool and innovative, and I'm very, very proud of Street Division and Public Works for doing that. So thanks, you guys. With that, our next section is Administrative Services. This department budget begins on page 65, and as Malia or Deputy Director Wade get ready for talking about goals and accomplishments, I'll cover the budget recommendation on page 65. So you can see there are two functional areas, finance and municipal court, within this overall department. Municipal court comprises about 22% of the total expenditure for the department. Finance is 78% of a total budget recommendation of $1.75 million for fiscal 22. When we look at those expenses by type or category, you'll see, not surprisingly, that 75% of that $1.75 million expenditure is for personnel. This is a very human capital driven function, providing our finance and accounting, accounts receivable, accounts payable, and operating the municipal court, as well as the utility billing section. So with that, I will allow either Jennifer or Malia, I'm not sure who's presenting this, to talk to you about their goals and accomplishments, starting on page 66.
Fantastic. Who's up? Who is up?
I think I'm going to start, and maybe Jen will pipe in then. But I wanted to talk about, this division, and we're kind of behind the scenes. People, we're not in the public eye too much. And people do not understand the amount of work that is coming from these divisions. And I wanted to talk about some of our accomplishments last year. You know, I'll just talk about our transition. We're in a reorg. We're trying to reorg this whole potential administrative services. We have been trying to do this for a year, and we've had lots of turnover. We have 5 new employees with less than a year. 2 are just recent hires. And we're trying to prepare for an ERP software in January. So we have a lot of transition going on. And I want to thank Jennifer Wade and Sean Klein, because they have made these divisions continue to function with all this turnover and new employees and transition, and appreciate all their help, because we would not be successful without them. And one of the things that I wanted to say is, you know, the CARES Act, we're not grant writers. We took initiative on the CARES Act. We've got $2.5 million in our fund balance. That has helped the city tremendously. We can give to the rec center, as you heard yesterday, the monies that we gave, and we're not hurting because of that. So I think that's a really big accomplishment that we have done. Also, on the other side of municipal billing, we went and established a grant program with Interfaith on the municipal billing for all the COVID people who were suffering during this time and didn't have jobs. And, you know, Sean personally called everyone, got them on a program with Interfaith, or called the business people and got them on payment plans. And I think they went out of their way to service the citizens through this time. The other thing I would like to talk about is that, you know, ERP is a huge event, and I don't think people understand what's coming besides the training and, trying to merge the division under one manager. It's a lot of work. And with that, a lot of transition and learning. And then we're having this ERP implementation, and my date to start is in January. So I want you to understand that key players, we're trying to get key players in place to keep the operations moving, and myself and Jen and potentially Sean and some things to be in and actually setting up the software and trying to do our jobs at the same time. So there's a lot of transition going on in administrative services. I believe the municipal court was innovative in this process, in that we were the first ones to set up Zoom, do jury trials, and a lot of things that we have still the Supreme Court orders in place that you have to have a lot of precautions when you're doing that. There's a lot of extra work in the court. So also with ERP, we're working on data conversion. Sean's working on data conversion in the court. We're getting close to having the data is pretty old, and there's a lot of decisions to make going into the new court software. Case management, we're trying to set up a timeline for it. We call Tyler, trying to figure out that. So those are some of the major things in my mind that we have really have done. And I think also really strategically sitting down and trying to figure out a strategy to keep the city running with the revenues that we receive, and have a strategic balance plan has been, I think, a very big success for our finance division and what we've accomplished with the city manager. We have done more or less, we have learned how to balance our budgets and do the financial forecast so we know where we're at on all our funds and everything that we're doing. So that's my overview of what I think we're going to need to do. And Jen, if you have any other comments, you can go right ahead.
Yeah, absolutely, Malia. There are some things I'd like to add. The first thing I'd like to do is bridge a little bit of a disconnect that you may see when you look at the budget totals and administrative services. And so, City Clerk, if you will indulge me, please, and go back to page 65 to the budget table for administrative services. I want to connect for you what's going on here in personnel with the reason behind it. And so what you see here is you see a reduction in personnel in municipal court, even though we have asked for around $25,000 in supplemental funding. This looks this way because we are reallocating positions within our division and moving things around between municipal court and finance. Now, if you look at finance, what you see is a fairly significant increase in personnel costs to the tune of about $190,000. I think it's 187 something to be specific. I would like to take a moment to explain this because I think it's important. Right now in administrative services, compared to last year's budget, we actually have an additional half a position budgeted in administrative services because of this departmental transition. That position is Chief Operations Manager Sean Klein. She will be transitioning to Public Works, but not until midway through next year. And so we are carrying a little bit of additional budget in finance related to that position. We also are carrying a little bit of additional budget because we are having a 100% dedicated municipal services billing supervisor in the future, and we have moved things around in municipal court to accommodate that. And finally, we have had so much attrition that we have lost a number of employees who actually, from a health insurance perspective, were rather cheap. I'm not sure if the council are aware, but for family health insurance is about $24,000 for an employee for a year. And so we lost several employees who actually did not have health insurance. They were replaced by employees who do have family health insurance, and $110,000 of that cost increase in personnel and administrative services is actually related to benefits. And so it's pretty shocking in a small department, a difference that attrition and benefits can make. This is not the first time I've seen this in the city, but I frankly was a little bit shocked as a member of the budget team and as a leader in administrative services, and I drilled down into this, and I wanted to take a minute and explain what's going on because we're not increasing from a personnel request, personnel expenditures, but you see this, and that's the reason for it. City Clerk, if you will, move back to page 66. I want to take a minute and explain this reorganization a little bit more. Malia touched on it. It is not just that we're moving the department under the leadership of one manager. We actually have entirely restructured 5 jobs. And as the city manager indicated yesterday, it's like the economic development plan. You get all your plans in order, you implement them, and 4 weeks later, COVID hits, and that's literally what happened to us. And so we are rebuilding 5 new positions, trying to organize our work more efficiently in line with council's goals to have more efficient operations. And it relates to the ERP project, but it really is about more than that. And so that is the spirit behind this reorganization, and a little bit more information on why that's happening. Now, looking forward next year, of course, what we're going to be focusing on is continuing to implement our reorganization, looking really heavily at that ERP software project, looking at the municipal court software project, complying with Wyoming Supreme Court orders as they change, because we're still under the old orders for COVID. And so we're just going to keep riding this wave of change and do what we need to do. And I would be remiss if I didn't say that I think that our teams have done exceptionally well. It's not just about the people you heard Malia mention, it's about all of us working together. We have one of the best teams, if not the best team in administrative services I've seen in my decade here. And so I'm very hopeful and thankful for them, and looking forward to the future and the things that we can accomplish, especially as we get into the software project.
Thank you.
And yeah. At this time, I think we could open it up for questions if any counselors have them.
What I would like to just say quickly before we move to the next comment or question is that this department, although not one that is always understood at a granular level as much as members of the council might wish, it has that circumstance because it's a complicated part of city government that does a great deal of things. It's sort of a critical part of the brains of the entire operation, but it commands and garners a lot of respect from the members of this council. We appreciate everything that you do. We have some idea of the level of difficulty, and certainly you've outlined and illustrated for us how that's increased over the last year, and we're not blind to that at all. So in light of all those things, we do want to express appreciation for how goals continue to be prioritized, those efficiencies that we always look for in city government, not because we think we're inefficient, but because we're always trying to be as efficient as possible and make changes as we can. And we do appreciate all of that work. We appreciate how the scope of that has been different this year. And it's good for us to hear some of these details about some of these upcoming projects and some of the challenges that you're meeting through the reorganization process. It's huge, and we're very grateful to you for the work that you do for the city of Laramie. And we don't always get those opportunities to express that, but these budget hearings, these budget meetings are a time when we can, and so we will, or at least I will, and I think the rest of the council will put up with it. So thank you. Council members, other questions for Malia or Deputy Wade or anybody here? Councilmember O'Doherty, why don't you go ahead?
I just wanted to say, for not being grant writers, you pulled the rabbit out of the hat several times this year, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
It seems to me like you are pretty proficient at grant writers. Other questions or comments, or just acknowledgement of the work that these people do for many other members of the council? All right. Well,
thank you, Mayor.
Yeah,
thank you, Council.
We are with you, and we want to support you, and we appreciate you. Maybe we'll move on to the next portion here.
Thank you, Mayor. I would just conclude this section by noting that, you know, the two front-facing parts of this department, utility billing counter and municipal court, really had to do what every department of the city did last year, which is really like completely redesign how we deliver services. And I have to say how just pleased I was. You know, we had City Hall shut down. Usually people come into this building to conduct their court and their billing and payment matters. And despite that, these guys just like put up portals for payment online, and it was just really quite amazing what they did. So, yeah, awesome crew. With that, our next section is human resources, which starts on page 68. And as Director Curry gets ready on the mic, I'll just cover the budget overview. So there's really just two little cost centers, one little cost center, one fairly large cost center under human resources. You can see the total budget for this is recommended at $470,397 for fiscal 22, just a few $1,000s different than in the current year. When we break that budget down, you see that overall 95% of it goes to our human resources management and administration. Safety budget accounts for a small percent of about 5%, and oftentimes there is grant pass-through in that safety budget. For spending categories, personnel is the lion's share, right? It takes people to run the human resources department, provide benefit administration and all of those human resource elements. And so 78% of all of those expenditures are really people investments here at the city. Investing in HR is, in my opinion, an investment in all of our employees. They provide a great deal of support to our staff members. Remember, we have, depending on the time of year, we have about 275 full-time benefited staff. And at certain times in year, in summer, when we're staffed up for summer activities, we may have as many as 100 or slightly more than 100 provisional or part-time staff. So that's a lot of employees that this department processes and supports. With that, I will let Human Resources Director Lori Curry step in. I did ask her in follow-up from our conversation last night to provide to the council, I think Councilor Gabriel had asked for this, but to provide some historical context for the number of full-time benefited equivalent positions we have here at the city. So Lori's going to talk to you about those numbers as published in our workforce report, and then also give you an overview of what positions are frozen.
All right, thank you, Council. It's good to see you this evening.
To answer those questions, first and foremost, I would like to tell you that based on our workforce report, which we did a 5-year, it was due the end of June. So June for fiscal year 20, so June 30th of 2020. We had changes from fiscal year 15 to fiscal year 20 from 284.5 full-time equivalent positions in 15 to 276.75 positions at the end of 2020 fiscal year. Most of those positions were fire and police. The downsize of those positions, there were 8 positions total, 6 in police, and fire had 2 in those downsizing in those positions. That was during the year of, actually, I don't have that in front of me what year that was, but that was when we cut back on some positions and tried to reallocate and see what we could do with less. And I will tell you that the city of Laramie runs very, very lean, as you're well aware of. And so in speaking to that, of that 276 positions, 0.75, at the end of fiscal year 2020, we had 9.25 positions that were frozen and 12 positions that were unfilled. So we were running on a level of about 250 employees, and that's kind of standard for us just because of the turnover, or because of, you know, we try to evaluate each time an employee retires or leaves us for whatever reason. We try to evaluate how we can do things more efficiently. If we could reorganize and absorb that workload in somewhere else. And I'll be honest with you, it's getting really, really, really difficult to start absorbing that additional workload with our low staffing numbers that we currently have. So as of today, we are down, I wrote that somewhere and I'll have to get to that. We are not specifically frozen, but you asked the question about the 2 positions in the city manager's office that you thought that maybe she had lost. Those did, in fact, based on that report that you were looking at, they were like Deputy Director Wade said, those positions were just reallocated from IT to the engineering department, which you heard Director Webb say today. But those positions that Janine still has in the city manager's office is a management analyst, and then that economic diversity and community initiative position. Those are still there. We're just not currently recruiting for them. So they are in her budget, but as well as those 2 positions, we have a total of 8 positions that we are currently not recruiting for. On top of that, we have approximately 14 positions that we are recruiting for. So if you take those 2 together, we're down from that 275.75 number, we're down about 22 positions. And of those 8 that I talked about that are unfilled and not currently recruiting for, some of them might be waiting to recruit at a later time when they, like with the administrative services department, they're talking about waiting to their customer service supervisor. That's a position that we will start recruiting for down the road when we get a little bit more time under our belt with the current staff they have that's new. But then there's some others that we may not fill for a while. So we're just constantly looking at how we can do things more efficiently with less people. And like I said before, that's getting tougher and tougher to do. So, but we'll keep on trudging away and fighting the good fight. So to that extent, I will answer any questions that I did not answer that came up from last night's conversation, and then before I go into my accomplishments for our department.
Thank you, Director Curry, for giving us a opportunity there to ask some further questions or follow-up questions. Did we have any? Councilmember Gabriel, were you able to get a picture of what you needed? Okay, all right. Other council member questions? Director Curry, I think we're ready to go to the next part.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, so I will tell you that I think you've heard of some of our accomplishments from other staff members in the conversations that you've heard, like last night. I did hear the police chief mention that we participated in a third-party evaluation for the market and adjustment for his staff.
that we did that. We also did it for fire, and I know that didn't come into play on any of the documents because that was in negotiations during this year, but we did participate with a third party for them as well. So we have implemented the police, and we will be implementing the fire in the next fiscal year. So we've done that. We also provided a lot. I'll tell you what, it was probably about 75% of our staff time this past year was used to track, do policy updates for COVID, just like you've heard from all the other departments. COVID affected everybody. And so we really, we had a lot going on with that, from policy building, to something that we hadn't even dreamed would happen, that pandemic, and that came upon us. But I will tell you that when that hit in March, I feel like we, as the leadership team and led by their city manager, we were on top of that right away as best we could, and we implemented the things as they came down. My staff had processed 230 tests for COVID for the staff that are here, and then we processed, but I think it was, I thought I had a number here, but I can't remember what it was total. But we had 32 people that we processed paid time off for negative tests, 42 people that we processed for positive tests, time off for positive tests, 18 for exposure, work exposure possible, and 77 for non-work related exposures, possible work exposures. So that was a lot of people that we processed time off for that was unexpected, as of course it was. The total paid time cost for staff was $281,000 last year that we processed out. It was that emergency sick leave that the federal legislature we put in policy based on the federal legislature, and out of that, there was some that we extended to public safety that we did not have to, but we felt like they were in the thick of things, and through discussions with the city manager, we felt like that was the right thing to do to keep our staff healthy, and not letting them bring it on into the workplace, which I think we did a really good job at that. We kept our numbers, our absentee numbers based on COVID were always below 10%. I think we never got much for an overall number. We never got much above 10% for the overall workforce. And that was really good to see, based on that, we had a lot of students that were coming through, and that a lot of them at the rec center, the provisionals, that I think they could have brought it to us. Our workforce could have gotten it a lot worse than they did. So that was a big accomplishment that I think our staff did a really great job on. The other thing that I'm really proud of my staff for is the threat assessment team. It's called TACT, and they've proactively researched and started implementing this. What they do is they proactively review incidents that may be occurring, or it's kind of like, are you okay type of thing. They want to make sure that the staff they're working with are okay, and if they see something that's not quite right, they want to make sure that they're okay, or that they were not finding a concerning risk that might be out there. And so they're implementing that. That's going to continue next year. They're right in the middle of training all the departments on how to use the Stop It app, which is an app that they can report via text or call, and they can report any concerns that they have. And that is a free app that we got through the Wyoming Association of Risk Management. So that didn't cost the organization anything. And the TACT team got the award from the Warm Association for the risk wins by their implementation of that. So I'm really proud of the work that they've done on that, and will continue to do. So that's what we will continue to work on that. We will also continue to do some COVID stuff, even though there's no leave available now and we're having really low numbers. We'll always need to stay on top of that and make sure that we don't have any continuation of that in-house. And then we just want to provide the services that for all the organization to make sure that they can recruit the best employees for the organization and retain those employees. And I think that, as you heard from different staff, we are really busy recruiting right now. They've had some turnover in places, and then we have some openings.
And it's just staff spend a lot of time doing interviews and work in that direction. With that, I would entertain any questions you might have.
Thank you for that breakdown. And like we've heard from all of the people in our departments, this was not a banner year for easy times in public services, and we appreciate everything that you've done and hearing a little bit about it too, and the highlights. Seems kind of funny to call them highlights, but the
lowlights.
Yeah, the lowlights and how you were able to do your best to deal with those. Councilmember Somerville, I see you've got a hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just have a question for Director Curry. When you talk about the time off, I know that was compensated by the feds, but I was curious, do you have a breakdown by division? I'm wondering if the time off was, if there was more quarantine or exposure for our first responders or our Parks and Rec, or what that might look like if you know offhand.
I don't have the specific breakdown, but I will tell you that what we did see is that every single one of the provisional staff from the rec center did take the time off. In fact, there were probably 70 of them that had time off, so that was a majority of that. Of course, they are not at the higher dollar ones because they're more entry level, but they definitely had the time off. And I think it's just the young group that you have out there, and they go out and they get it. I feel like our staff was more mature and conscientious. Our full-time staff was more mature and conscientious about what they were, where they were going and what they were doing.
Mr. Mayor,
yeah, and I would add to that to say, Councilor Somerville, through you, Mayor, that the management team at the start of the pandemic, and it seems like a million years ago when I reflect on it. It stuns me when I realize it was just a year ago. But Lori will attest to the fact that we had extensive conversations at the level of our management team, the department heads and myself and HR director, COO and ACM, with the goal for the pandemic being, how do we manage our personnel resources against any interruption of service to our residents? Because as you all know, we have departments. I mean, take Lori's department just because she's in the hot seat right now. There's only 3 staff members in there, and they work in a very small, closed-in office space. If one of them were to get COVID, particularly back when it seemed to be less known how to treat it and whatnot, they could spread it very easily to the other 2 staff members and take out an entire department. And HR isn't unusual. I mean, look at, for instance, the street department, a more functionally relevant department in terms of external services that residents see. There's only a handful of folks down there, too, working in close quarters. So management team really took that into account as part of our pandemic plan. We tried to implement engineering controls in terms of hard fixed changes in the workspace to minimize infection. But maybe as equally important, we implemented really aggressive protective measures for PPE, for cleaning of surfaces, for all of that, because our goal was we have to keep our people healthy because we could take out a whole department. And what's going to happen if we take out, the wastewater treatment plant operators and they're all sick at the same time? So I just have to say, I appreciate that question a lot, Councilor Somerville, and I think that's probably like this unsung success from the last year, that with that leadership and HR and all of the department heads really being aggressive, we were able to continue providing service with no interruption for our constituents, even though we did have, at one point, we had one division, an important one, solid waste, with slightly more, I think it was 11 or 12% absenteeism at one moment in time. But that was the highest we ever got. So.
Well, City Manager and Director Curry, I just wanted to say I appreciate that because I think I saw that on the ground last year, certainly before I rejoined council. I appreciate the steps that you guys took to keep the staff safe. I mean, that's an important consideration. The other question I wanted to ask you, Director Curry, is in terms of workforce trends. There was a lot of telework involved, I'm sure, and for some departments that works with the city, others it doesn't. I wondered if you had maybe a 20-second answer on what does that look like for the future in terms of remote working and adjusting workspaces to help recruit and retain people and make it a better environment. Is that something you guys are thinking about and looking at for long-term changes?
Yeah, actually, that's a wonderful question, Councillor Somerville. And through you, Mayor, I will answer that, or to the best of my ability anyways.
You can take longer than 20 seconds.
I was going to say, I've already taken 20 seconds up, right?
Yeah, go ahead and take as long as you need to answer that question.
All right, well, thank you. I think that that's something we always need to look at. And I've always said to my staff in here, and hopefully to other people, is that flexibility is the key to keeping people happy and healthy and willing to and wanting to work for us. So I think that long term, we need to be flexible enough for that to see if that's available to work for them in our organization. I think we always want to make sure that we're doing the most efficient thing for our employees or for our organization, but at the same time be flexible enough to utilize that if it's available and necessary. So, that's kind of a roundabout way to say that we'll always continue to evaluate that and see if that's not something we want to continue.
I guess I have a question maybe back at you, counselors. And that is this: I agree with everything Lori said. We've been trying to offer, flex work schedules and whatnot for years. But I think COVID has taught us a lesson, just like it's taught every other business in the world a lesson about remote work and the limitations of remote work, but maybe the opportunities that remote work has that we all didn't really realize before COVID. As a manager, I wonder about, as a public sector manager, I wonder about how the public will feel if public employees work remotely more. And so I put back to you all, not maybe you don't have to answer it, but just a question to think about into the future. I think a lot of our employees are really eager to continue some of this remote work and working from home more on Zoom meetings and that kind of thing. But I struggle with how the public will receive that and also how the council will prefer us to provide those services. Will in-person, face-to-face, will we go back to that? Or will we adapt like the private sector and say, we don't have to be face-to-face all the time?
City manager, that's a great question to reflect back at us. And I've been thinking about that exact question as I've heard from Director Curry and listened to the answers that she's provided to some of these questions. And frankly, that all of the folks from the different departments have shared with us over the budget period here. And I think a lot of what's going to determine the answer to that question lies in what the private sector does and how they respond and how they adapt. If it becomes a situation where public services, education, local governments, things of that nature, prioritize worker safety in ways that the private sector doesn't, then I think that impacts the outcome of that question. I think some areas of the private sector have been really mindful and tried to do everything they can, if it's possible for their employees to do those things, and other areas maybe less so. And I think those things are going to affect that outcome. If it's seen that for some reason public sector employees are somehow given more options and their safety is prioritized at a higher level than employees in other agencies, then that's a difficult question. I don't think we're universally seeing that, but I think that's an aspect of this question that we have to grapple with as we move forward. I think some private sector employees have said, no, great, we want you to be safe, we want you to allow to work from home. Oh, you like working from home? Okay, let's integrate that into your work life. And other areas, not so much. Now, to be fair, there are lots of jobs where that's not an option. We understand that. And it's unfortunate, but it's just a reality. And that goes for the city, and that goes for lots of other employers as well. But I think we need to kind of stay tuned into that. And I'm confident that our HR department is doing that, but I think that's what's going to impact that a lot, and I think it's something we need to pay attention to. Other council members, do you have any further questions or comments? I don't see any. Oh, I do, from the vice mayor, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily think we have to wait on the private sector, partly because I think all the job, people's jobs are different, right? So certain jobs you could very easily do from home, and others, not so much. And yeah, so I think it's just a matter of working it out and having ways to, to be accountable and productive and comfortable and getting your job done. I mean, it's crazy as it seems. I've been working at home for over a year now, and frankly, don't miss a beat, to some extent, and I actually like the convenience of not having to find parking or spending the time getting to a meeting or, stuff like that. I think I actually can spend more time on task, from one space with Zoom and web conferencing meetings. So I don't know. Like I said, I think if you can make it work, as long as the folks are productive. I think you're fine. So
I don't disagree with the Vice Mayor and Director Curry. I'll go right to you. I don't disagree with any of those statements at all. My comment wasn't that we needed to wait. What my concern is having had some experience as a public employee myself, to a narrative where public employees are criticized as being coddled or treated differently than employees in the private sector, and somehow given advantages that other workers aren't, and how that can breed kind of a resentment and make the job of providing public services, whether it be through the city or education or any other public service employment sector, more difficult by contributing to that narrative, which I think is inaccurate. Director Cree, go ahead.
Thank you. I was just going to say that throughout the time when we were shut down and we were trying to limit the people that were in the office, so we only had one person in the office and we had everybody else. And maybe it's just because we deal with human resources, or that's our job. But my staff and myself were ready to get back and get involved with other people, because being where we only had one person in the office, everyone else was working remotely, was really difficult for us to feel like we were connected to each other and to do our jobs. So that's just one thing that I think flexibility is important, that we can watch it and view it and maybe even do it on a temporary basis here and there or a part-time basis. But I myself don't want to do it permanently. That's just not the way I need to connect to people.
I appreciate that. Councilor Gabriel, I saw that you had a hand up.
You bet. Thanks, Mayor. Hopefully you haven't covered this. I'm trying to listen to the rec board meeting as well. So one of the things the university is doing, Director Curry, this summer, and they did it last year, maybe the year before, was allowing individuals during the summer months to work 32 hours with reduced pay. I was wondering if the city had considered that, working through their direct supervisor and department heads to see if they didn't want to work the full 40 hours a week, maybe cut back a little bit, have more flex time in the summer, and save the university a little money. Has the city considered doing anything like that?
Councilor Gabriel, through you, the mayor. Actually, no, but it's not something unheard of. I would just say that as lean as we are and the amount of work that we have on our current staff, it'd be really difficult. The workload of it would fall on somebody else. So it would be something that we would have to watch and look through very carefully and closely, because I just don't know. Like I said earlier, I'm really concerned with the amount of work that we're already putting on our lean staff. So it's just something we could think about, but I do worry about that. But then 32 hours a week might be the benefit of that too. So it might give them the break that they need. So it's a very good idea and something that we should research.
Understand. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions or input on this? I don't see anyone. So why don't we move to the next portion?
Okay, Lori, thank you so much for your input, and thanks for the work Human Resources does. And I think we all are happy to hear that our Human Resource Director wants to be in the office face-to-face with staff, right? But we might expect that of a Human Resource Director's personality. So thanks, Lori. We're going to move, Council, to our enterprise funds now. We're going to start with the utility fund, which is your water and your wastewater operation. And for page reference, we're in page 89 of the operating and maintenance budget book. We're going to start out with the Chief Operating Officer and our Deputy Director for Administrative Services talking to us first about the financial position of the fund, and then second, looking at the revenue outlook and projections. So I believe Jennifer Wade will start us off.
Great.
Good evening again, Mayor, councilors. I'll take you through a brief overview of the financial condition for the water. But before I do that, I'd like to take a moment and orient us, because we've just shifted. And we've shifted from governmental funds into our business type funds. And that's a notable shift from a budgeting standpoint, because what we're dealing with now are funds that account for what I would call exchange transactions. And what that means is the city provides something in return for a fee. And in this case, for the water fund, we will be providing water utility service in exchange for our rates. And we have control through ordinance setting of those rates and are able to plan for the operation of these funds and the infrastructure over a long period of time. And that structure is the same for all of our business type funds, the water fund, the wastewater fund, and the solid waste fund. So I won't repeat that, but I'd like to note that shift before we move on to the financial position of these funds. The water fund is in excellent financial health due to the financial planning initiatives that started in 2010 when we engaged the services of a rate consultant that helped us build a long-term financial plan, a 10-year plan, and also build rates around that, our financial requirements of the fund. City Clerk, if you will, could you go to page 90? And scroll to the bottom of the page to look at the bottom graphs. Perfect, that's wonderful. I'd like to point out the graph at the bottom of page 90, the first column. This shows you an illustration of water fund revenue since 2011. Annually since that time, our water fund revenue, our water charge revenue has grown by about $2 million. That is due to nothing more than financial planning and rate increases. I'd like to then move to the chart on the next, in the next column, which is the Expenditure Trends Chart. Since 2011, what I'd like for you to notice is that most of those lines are fairly flat. I think what you see here is the city's tendency to avoid growing our operating costs at fairly pretty much any cost, right? We like to keep our operating costs tucked in tight, and that's what you see in this graph. You do see a couple of expenditure lines with significant variation. We would expect this in an infrastructure intensive operation like the utilities. So you see, of course, a couple of notable spikes in capital spending as well as capital project transfers. In capital spending, the spikes relate to a major raw water pipeline project, a 20-inch transmission line project, and notably, the capital project transfer is for the Municipal Operations Center. You'll see more of those this fiscal year or early next fiscal year to round out that project. Those have already been approved in the budget. One thing I would like to note for this fund is that the rate increases that have been necessary were far less than expected. The 2010 specific purpose tax really helped that. That tax approved, the voters approved about $8 million in specific purpose tax proceeds that helps the water fund infrastructure. And so what you see here reflects all of that. City Clerk, if you could move to page 91. The chart at the top of the page shows you fund balance trends in 2011. And I thought today a little bit about how to break this down. And so I'd like to draw your attention to, in 2011, us having just over $10 million in fund balance. Now that's total fund balance, right? The operating expenses in the water fund are about $5.8 million a year. And so if you think about this, if you keep a reserve on hand of about half that, $3 million in operating, we only had in our fund balance at the time this financial planning began enough for a couple of capital projects, period, right? And you all have seen, we all just went over our capital investment and construction plan. And you can see what our need is for utility infrastructure. And this fund balance growth, what this is really doing is providing that capital reserve so we can keep up on that infrastructure improvement. And I think this graph illustrates this really nicely. You're going to see this mirrored in the Wastewater Fund and the Solid Waste Fund. Right below this chart is our disclosure regarding our ending unassigned reserve in fiscal year 2020. You'll notice in the water fund it's at 6 months. Our policy is 3 to 6 months, so we are right in line there. And at the bottom of this column, City Clerk, if you would be kind enough to scroll down. We are also disclosing to you that the city manager's recommended budget is in balance, which means that, again, to repeat from last night, forecasted revenue plus available reserves does not exceed recommended expenditures for fiscal year 22. Now, looking at fiscal year 20, in retrospect, the year ended about how we would have expected. Water service charges experienced a small decline that was due to consumption changes due to some unusual weather patterns, but nothing to be concerned about there. Expenditures overall decreased around $245,000, and so a fairly typical year for this fund with normal rebudgets of capital amounts between construction seasons. Looking at fiscal year 2021, our water charges are up about 4.8% through March compared to the prior year. That's because we have a little bit more normal weather pattern this year and consumption has bounced back. Spending is normal. We are looking forward to the construction season ramping up for summer of 2021. We have some really big projects. Once that North Tank project gets going, it's a pretty big one. And so it will move forward this summer as well as some other significant projects. And so 2021 will end as we expected it to. And that would be my summary of the Water Fund financial position. Before I pass it off to Malia to discuss revenue, are there any questions?
Do we have any questions for that presentation? Doesn't look like it.
Okay, do you want me to go ahead then, Mayor? So I can
Yeah,
go
I
on?
think so. Yep, I think so, please.
Okay. City Clerk, if you go to the bottom of 92. If you look at the forecasted revenue for fiscal year 22, this fund is forecasted at 22 million. You know, right now there's quite a bit of grants and loans going into this fund. If we can go on another page and I'll give you detail, but mainly it's for the North Tank and we have a small, mainly for the North Tank, we have a lot of funding with WWDC and we have also DWSRF. And so WWDC is the Wyoming Water Development Commission. They usually fund big projects for cities. The North Tank project, we've got a grant loan component where 67% is grant, 33% is loan. And I can show you the breakout on the next page once we get there. If you look at that on page 93, you can see that out of this this loan, 67%, 1.2 million, and 33%. The 7303 grant that they've given us, and the drinking fund, we have SRF SLIB on that, and they did a loan for that piece of it. So it's significant dollars of over 12 million for this project, and that's why it's pretty high at this point, and we're going to continue with that. We look at those things on any big project, especially a transmission line. We would go for big funding in order to keep the rates low. when you look at the water charges, there is, I am estimating a slight decrease, just in lieu of, we don't know what's going to happen with, at this point, and when I did this, it was a few months earlier than what's going on now with Jacoby and some of the things that are happening with the university. So I did take some of the water charges down from that perspective. And, you know, this fund also has, just so you know, it has, you know, the Monolith Ranch in there, some miscellaneous fees for the Monolith Ranch and the ranching operations. And we also are collecting, if you remember, we're getting revenue from the general fund because the general fund took a loan from the water fund for the municipal operations center. And it really is an investment for the water fund because the rate that they're getting is more than they can get in the market at this point. So that is, typically we don't have a bunch of revenue like you saw in the general fund. It pretty much is what we're charging for services. So that is what's happening in the revenues for the water fund. And I think I also have to go over rates. And so I guess I'll just jump in on the rate and what we're doing. And so, you know, we started these rate discussions in 2010. We had a study, just to give some of the new members some history. We had not been increasing rates. And as you saw, Jennifer, you know, we had almost $100 million forecast of projects over 20 years and now no funding. Even if we put some of the grants and stuff in, we just weren't, we had a lot of water breaks, and we went through a rate study of 5 years. We got SPT tax to offset some of the rates. And so now I think we're at a place where it's, you know, every 2 years in the biennium, we look at a rate study, try to update the rates, review our 10-year capital plan to make sure that we still are on track with the needs of these funds and that we're meeting the needs of the public to keep up with our utilities. And so, and mainly it's for capital. And so when right now we have Raftilius, who is they did the model. We started the project with the both water and wastewater. We've put together the forecasted model. They have just got back to me last week, and I have not looked at it yet, but they're asking for a lot of information on history and updates. Even though we did it in the model, they like to analyze the consumption and things like that, so they can look at that. We're planning a work session in fall. We would have a work session with you all on and go over all this stuff with both the water and the wastewater. That is being planned in the fall. If rates need to go forward, then we would have 3 readings before January. That's really the timeline. So that's my overview of rates on both water and sewer. I can talk a little bit about sewer a little more when we get there. If you have any questions, let me know. Thanks.
All right.
So Mayor, I will talk us through the recommended expenditure for water fund. I'm going to start on page 95, and I guess I won't go forward unless I know that you don't have any additional questions for either Deputy Director Wade or Chief Operating Officer Brown.
I don't see hands up, so I think okay to keep going.
Okay, very good. So at the top of page 95, you'll see that we are maintaining our 22.25 FTEs in the water system. That will remain unchanged for fiscal 22. Both Malia and Jennifer mentioned the rate changing and rate restructuring that we went through in 2010 through 13-14. As part of that effort, we also did increase staffing in our water and in our wastewater side, which we'll talk about next. Based on recommendations from our consultant to bring us to really industry common best practice levels for properly maintaining a system. The point is, of course, to restructure rates so that we can make sufficient capital investments in infrastructure replacement to maintain the system in perpetuity. But once you put in shiny new pipes, you certainly want to take good care of them, and that requires staff resources to execute that maintenance responsibility. So we have been at this same staffing level of just over 22 full-time equivalent benefited positions for a number of years, and at this point have fully implemented the staffing increase that was part of our rate restructuring plan some 7-8 years ago. So I'm looking at budgeted expenditures in the water department. As the Director of Public Works gets ready to talk to you about goals and accomplishments, I'll note for you there are 5, 6, 7 cost centers or functional areas within the water department, starting with administration, pumps and wells, the treatment plant, our transmission, and our meters, and then finally our Monolith Ranch program, which is a bit of an anomaly, not something you typically see in a water fund, but a very important asset for the city of Laramie and its future water growth, water to facilitate growth and development. As you know, the Monolith Ranch Cost Center is tied to our Water Rights Cost Center because the reason, of course, we have the ranch is to maintain those water rights for future conversion and municipal use to support decades and decades and generations probably of growth in this city. So in total, I'm recommending an allocation of $45.9 million for the water fund. That is slightly larger than the $39.1 million that we have in current fiscal year. Some of that, as we say over and over, is projects carrying forward in a rebudgeted fashion from this current year into the next because they were unable to be completed in a single construction season. When you break that $45.9 million recommendation down by type of expenditure at the bottom of page 96, you can see from the pie chart that we see a real change here in our operating and maintenance budget, where we're really making a capital and large equipment investment that is the lion's share of all of the investment in the water system itself. Personnel comprises a much smaller part. Those 22 FTEs we talk about really only account for about 5% of the total expenditure of this operation. So it's much smaller, and that makes sense, of course, because this is an infrastructure and maintenance heavy section and heavy operation. If you move to the top of page 97, you can see those expenditures by type just represented a little bit differently. And then what I'd like to focus on just a bit is the supplemental requests that I'm recommending for the upcoming fiscal year. Those start and actually are completed on page 97. In total, I'm recommending $328,000 in supplemental or additional budget for the water function. Let's see, 2 of these 5 are one-time expenses. Really, $40,000 of that $328,000 is one-time expense for the water rate study that our Chief Operating Officer just mentioned, and the setup and training for the cloud-based meter system that we're going to be working on implementing over a number of years. 3 of the 5 requests are ongoing, meaning they will be added to the budget and continue to be in the budget in coming years. They are all tied to, well, 2 of the 3 are tied to the cloud-based meter system that we're working to implement. I have to tell you, we're excited about this, although it is a lot of work to roll out new metering programs and services. But I think that the $198,000 that I'm recommending to you here to adjust our meter replacement budget and purchase those cloud-based meters and transmitters is actually going to be a very good thing for not only our operations, but for our residents or our consumers of water within the city. They're going to gain a lot of ability to understand and manage their consumption patterns. And I think we also have the possibility of accruing some savings in terms of use of water resources as people understand better how they're using water at their home or their business and are able to better control that and perhaps control it better toward conservation as a goal to give them more control over what they pay for water. As you move to page 98, centrally budgeted adjustments that are being planned for amount to $17,500. very small amount in total. And again, these centrally budgeted adjustments are overhead administrative costs, natural gas, electricity, etc., that we just must budget for to maintain our operations and continue providing these services. And then you see the capital construction fund transfer, which we talked about last month with the capital budget. With all of that said, if you have questions for me, I'm happy to answer those. The next few pages do kind of look at capital again, and since we talked about this last month, I will skip over that and stand for questions. And then the Public Works Director is happy to weigh in with any goals or achievements that he would like to highlight.
City Manager, I don't see anyone with questions. I think we can just keep moving unless I've missed somebody here. I think we're good.
Great. Brooks, why don't you take it from here, and if anyone comes up with a question in the meantime, they can get their mic hot.
Sounds good. Vice Mayor, City Council, I'm kind of jumping back up to page 89. Where it talks about our accomplishments and goals and objectives moving forward. It really is what you'll see there is our accomplishments toward city council goals are really based on your goal of maintaining and improving infrastructure. And you see numerous projects there that the water fund folks are striving to maintain that infrastructure. The water fund is responsible for the treatment and distribution of water to 32,000 people in and around Laramie. They operate the water treatment plant, install and repair water meters, replace and repair water lines. Moving forward into 2022, our objectives are very similar in that the plan is to maintain and improve infrastructure. One of the big challenges that we know we're going to see this year at the at the water treatment plant is the water runoff this year is going to be tough because, as you recall, we had 2 large fires burn in our watershed last year. And so we're anticipating some increased treatment at the facility, and our water treatment operators are keeping a close eye on that. We're already seeing elevated levels of particulates, and they're working hard to ensure that the water that we're receiving is good, healthy water that meets all DEQ regulations. But they're going to have some challenges this year out at the treatment plant with the runoff from the fires. Yeah, I think that's all I got for you right now. If there's any questions, I'll be happy to take those.
So, Brooks, I guess what I heard you say is ever more importance and dependence on that Casper aquifer.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions? I'm scrolling through the top here. I don't see anybody. So I think we're good to go.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. So, Council, I'll move us to the other side of your utility fund and to page 108. Actually, let me give you a better page number reference. We're going to go to page 103. I apologize. 103 will start your wastewater operations within the overall utility fund. Similar to how we've handled things previously, I'm going to let the Deputy Director talk about financial position, the Chief Operating Officer cover revenue projections, and then I will cover expenditure.
Okay, moving into the wastewater fund, many of the things that I discussed on the water fund will also apply here. And so I will focus on the things that make this fund unique rather than repeating myself. City Clerk, if you could you move to page 104? I'd like to start with the chart that illustrates the change in revenue over time, which is in the bottom of the first column. So this chart illustrates the change in wastewater revenue over the last 10 years. And what you're going to notice in comparison to the water fund is that annually revenue has changed by just under $1 million in the past 10-year period. So not nearly the increase as in our water fund. This fund is in, I would call it, stable financial condition. And things are proceeding as planned. The wastewater fund did also benefit from the 2010 SPT tax to the tune of $6 million. So just like in the water fund, the rates are less than the consultants and staff originally expected. In the next column, if you wouldn't mind scrolling up, City Clerk, we can see expenditure trends. And this chart looks almost identical to the water fund, with those operating expenses remaining more or less stable and peaks in capital spending. The peak in capital support transfers is related to the Municipal Operations Center, just as it was in the water fund, with some specific spending on the South Laramie Sewer Project and the Sea Lime Project, causing that big capital spike around 2016. So all in all, very comparable between these funds. If we scroll down a little bit on this page, you're going to see fund balance trends. In comparison to the water fund, if you look, what you're going to see is us starting in 2011 with a fund balance of around $10 million. Operating expenses in the wastewater fund, excluding debt, are around $3.5 million. And so this fund was a little bit better positioned to start, if you think of our reserves in this way, than the water fund was. And it's got a little bit more gradual growth over time. That growth, just like in the water fund, is to fund the required capital reserve, linking back to the capital plan you saw during our capital budgeting process. Moving on to the next page, we are disclosing to you that we ended fiscal year 20 with 4.7 months in unassigned reserve. That is within the city's policy of 3 to 6 months. And right below that, we are disclosing to you again that the city manager has proposed to you a balanced budget for fiscal year 2022. Looking back to fiscal year 20, we saw an overall decline in wastewater revenue of around 4.4%. However, we only about 2.4% was a decline we experienced in service charges. And so not all of that was in charges for services. You can get variation in revenue due to intergovernmental revenue sources like grants as we draw down on projects at different rates. And so some variation here can be quite normal. Looking at expenditures, they were significantly lower in fiscal year 20 compared to 2019 because 2019 had a significant interfund transfer for the Municipal Operations Center. Looking at 2021, service charge revenue is about 0.2% up. So it's more or less even with where it was the previous fiscal year, and expenditures are proceeding as expected. And so this fund is just cruising right along, right in line with our expectations. And at this time, I would open it up for questions. And if there are none, pass it to Malia.
Yes, Council or Clerk, if you could go to page 106. And if go down just a little more so they can see the capital related revenue. Thank you. In this fund, Council, once again, we do have some significant grants and loans. And if you look for the projects that we are always seeking, the North Side Outfall, which is kind of the complement to the North Tank project. It's the development piece to the north. We got a $2.5 million loan, but 625 is forgiveness, meaning it's kind of a grant of that. And we also have a big project at the wastewater treatment plant of $9.5 million funded. 7.6 had interest to it, 1.9 had green tied to it, so we're not have any interest on that piece of the loan. I will say in talking about rates, and I'll go back up to the wastewater charges. They're pretty much stable. We're looking at similar revenues. The one thing that stands out on the page is that we are leasing some of the equipment in this fund. If you go look at the lease purchase proceeds, if we have big purchases of equipment, we try to lease it, so we're not paying a lot of cash out for some of that equipment, and we're getting lease proceeds in, so we amortize those costs over 3 to 4 years. And this fund has that in this revenue piece. However, I did want to talk about the rates in wastewater. Our preliminary, there's things that did happen in our forecast, our financial forecast, that may have an impact on rates, or we're going to have to see if we can get additional funding. And one thing that happened is when we put the wastewater treatment plant in, we were expecting a 25% grant match for CFSRF from SLIB. They did not have anything available, so we have no grant match on that project, which is affecting the fund. The other thing that affected the fund that was not in our original forecast, 3 or 4 years ago, was Reynolds Street. We did not, that was not expected. Developers came in and said, hey, we need to develop here, and there was some concern from the utilities department that we may be at capacity, but it was not on our plan. I think it was unexpected. It was kind of when I just took over. So those are things that will have some impact on the rates and looking at the rate forecast. And, I can't tell you where it's going to land at this point, but it does affect the rates because we were making assumptions that did not happen. And, potentially could have some rates, and we're looking at maybe, some extra funding. The American Rescue Plan does have sewer projects, that could help the rate if we looked at some of that money to be applied to this fund. So just wanted to talk about that. That's really the only difference in rates that I wanted to talk about from the first one, because we're doing it together, the rate study together with water and wastewater. Let me know if you have any questions.
Did I just see Aaron's hand
Yes.
go up?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
The graph on page 104 shows a big drop. I think that looks like debt services, or was that operating supplies for the expenditure trends?
There is a big drop. That's a great question, Councilor O'Doherty, and that is actually related to the city paying off debt on a prior capital project. The debt service was around $1 million a year, and that's what you see there. Yes.
Good. That means it's paid off.
I'm sorry, I overlooked that. Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, I don't see any other questions, so I think we can just keep moving right along.
Okay, thank you, Vice Mayor. So Council, I am on page 107. And as you see outlined here, as you have in previous budgets, we do denote goals that the council has adopted related to this budget. I'll point out on the middle of page 107 that, as with the water side of the utility fund, on the wastewater side, FTEs or staffing allocations remain consistent and were brought up to industry standard as part of our rate restructuring and adjustments 7-8 years ago. Moving to page 108, you'll see the 6 functional cost centers reflected individually there within the wastewater operation. In total, I'm recommending a fund allocation of $27.556 million for wastewater operations. That's just slightly larger for operations and maintenance than in the current year by just a factor of a few $100,000. When you look at those expenditures by type at the top of page 109, you'll see, similar to the water side of the utility fund, that in wastewater as well, capital projects and large equipment are the primary cost driver in this service. Personnel accounts for a very small percentage, 5%, and then we do have a few other small categories, debt service, as was just discussed by our deputy director, and then contractual services, materials and supplies accounting to about 4%. The other thing I'll mention is the interfund transfers for capital to the major capital construction fund. Those are additional capital expenditures of $1.544 million that account for 5%. So in total, looking at the interfund capital transfers and the capital projects budgeted within wastewater, roughly 87% of all of these dollars, these $27.5 million, really are going toward capital. Looking at departmental supplementals or recommended additions to the budget, at the lower portion of page 109, there is just one, and this aligns with the council goals and with the comments that the Chief Operating Officer has made with respect to completing our rate study. As we discussed for water, we'll be doing the same for wastewater. I think you've probably gleaned thus far from the conversation about financial position and revenue outlook and some unexpected expenditures related to the Reynolds Street wastewater line that we do believe that it is probably going to be the case that we will need to make some rate adjustments on the wastewater side of our operation when the rate study comes back to us, and we'll be bringing that in front of you probably in the fall, I suspect, for adjustments that would take place likely at the first of the year in January. Moving to the next page and looking at the second type of recommended adjustments or increases or decreases to the budget for centrally budgeted overhead expenses. We're actually recommending an adjustment downward or a reduction in budget for these business expenses of $9,000, and the detail of that lies there. Most of it is being driven by a downward trend in electrical costs that we are projecting for the upcoming year. And that's a summary of expenditure. With that, I believe the Public Works Director would like to take you back in the pages to talk about goals and accomplishments from the prior and into the future year.
Thanks, Janine. Yeah, so I'm back on page 103. As you know, the wastewater division, their primary job is the collection and treatment of wastewater generated within Laramie. The goals and objectives that you're going to see there are right in line with your council goal, again, of maintaining and improving infrastructure. A lot of small projects, and then, like you heard, the large, almost $10 million project out at the wastewater treatment plant. The facility out there is basically 25 years old right now, which is kind of the end of life for a lot of equipment that's used there. So a lot of what we're doing out there is replacing old and outdated equipment. With that, I'll take any questions if you have.
Okay, I'm just scrolling through. I don't see any cameras going on or hands raised.
I have a hand up.
Oh, sorry, I missed you. Go ahead.
It just came up. I wanted, the wastewater folks are my heroes, as every other department, but when I see people out there having to clean out sewer lines, and it's nasty, it's always like nasty weather and on the weekends. So I want to say how grateful I am. And also, I know that you contributed, like, for public health, the testing for COVID, and I didn't see that testing in the wastewater. You did some of that this year too, didn't you? We're still doing it. Thank you.
Yeah, Councilor Doherty, that's a great point. I did pass over that. I have it up on my screen here to mention. Actually, we're working with the Wyoming Public Health and Wyoming Rural Water and DEQ on the Wyoming COVID-19 wastewater monitoring program. And we're still doing that. I think the contract with them goes through June. So we're taking samples at the wastewater treatment plant right now. We were doing samples at the wastewater treatment plant and at the manholes near the dorms. Right now, they've cut back to just at the wastewater treatment plant, and then those results throughout the state, not just ours, are published online. And really, the intent is for decision makers like you folks to use that information in making decisions related to COVID-19. And as what we've seen is really decrease over the last few months, obviously, in the prevalence we're getting in the wastewater, which is good news, and we're seeing that across the state. So yeah, thanks for mentioning that. I actually had that up on my other screen to bring up and failed to do so.
Thank you. Thanks for all the work.
Hey, Brooks, and Vice Mayor, if it's okay, if I could prompt Brooks on one other item. Council, I just sent you a link to our most recent Gem City Spark newsletter for the community, and I wondered if Brooks could touch a little bit upon our wipes, clog, pipes efforts on public education, which we had done public education on this previous to COVID, but it certainly was exacerbated. The need for it was exacerbated by COVID and the use and then subsequent flushing of a lot of really unflushable products.
Sure. Yeah, the flushable wipes and products is, as you know, during the COVID toilet paper shortage of 2020 was kind of a big deal for us. Through April and May especially, our crews were very busy cleaning out pumps and lines that were clogged as people were using alternative methods other than toilet paper. And it did cause a lot of extra work for the guys and a lot of time that was spent on that. To be quite honest with you, I spoke with our utility folks. Paul Beckett, I think, is on the line. I spoke with him recently, and other than those events that we had in April and May last year, this isn't a huge deal for us. Usually, our bigger problem is with grease and things like that, and we have an active PR program where we work with restaurants. We have grease drop stations around town for people to use. So honestly, the flushable wipes and things that shouldn't be flushed down the toilet, although we do push PR on occasion for that, that's not during normal operations. It's not a huge issue for us. Our transmission lines and facilities can handle a certain amount of that. It's just, during that toilet paper shortage, we had quite a surge of other items being flushed.
Council, I had wanted to address that topic in part because the council had requested a work session on it, and I thought maybe it would be sufficient to address it here in the budget overview and then share the public outreach materials with you that we've prepared. If you determine you'd like a more comprehensive work session in the future, just let me know. But if this has done the trick, that would be great. I'll let you know that in that Gem City Spark article, there's also, I thought this was just so ingenious of my staff. They came up with a Flush with Care word scramble program exercise. So if you're into puzzles and word scrambles, we've designed one that will teach good flushing etiquette to the community, in particular children. Oh, the clerk is screen sharing that, yeah. So you can see at the bottom of this page that the clerk is screen sharing pictures that we actually took of clogged infrastructure that we had, and then the word scramble there. So if you're bored and you don't have anything to do, there you go.
I would like to say, yeah, this does the trick for me. I was concerned about it because I know certain lines get clogged frequently with these wipes where there's roots and dog leg problems with pipes. So thank you. That I'm the one that asked for this, so this does it for me. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Erin. Do we have any other questions from anybody? Okay, my only comment would be, we do this kind of on a regular basis, this notification to the public, just, every 6 months or 9 months, I don't know, some sort of pattern, I guess. Anyway, we can keep moving on then. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. And we will do that. I think, any community, but in particular a college community where we have somewhat of a transient population, these kinds of articles and reminders probably should go out at least once a year to kind of keep people abreast of what to flush and what not to flush to keep the system working well. So we're moving to the last section of our conversation tonight. So it looks like we're going to be ending sooner, and I think everyone will be happy for that because last night was a little bit late. We're moving to page 113 of the budget book, and Administrative Services Deputy Director Jennifer Wade can talk to us about the financial position of the Solid Waste Fund.
Okay. We're going to round out our discussion of the business type funds with the Solid Waste Fund. City Clerk, if you could progress to page 114, please. The Solid Waste Fund is in excellent financial health. The financial planning started for it a little bit later than in the water and wastewater funds, but working with the rate consultant, we were really able to build a rate structure that provided for some of the long-term needs in this fund. What is a little bit unique in the solid waste operation is that we have a landfill, and so we don't only have to worry about landfill needs for today or its expansion, but we have to fund closure and post-closure care obligations. And so this operation comes with that financial commitment. If you look at the revenue trends chart at the top of page 114, what you're going to see is that revenue in this fund has grown differentially since rate planning began. And that is because the rate structure in this fund is different for each operation. We have collection for which revenue has remained relatively stable over the last 10-year period. Disposal revenue has grown by about $660,000, recycling and diversion by $500,000, and landfill dump fee revenue by $1.1 million. And there's a reason you see that bigger amount in landfill dump fees, right? And disposal, because that's related more to the landfill operation. And so you can see the carve out and the rate structure apparent in this revenue growth, and that is a little bit different for the Solid Waste Fund as compared to our other business type funds. Like I said, this rate planning did begin a little bit later, and the rate design was in progress for longer than in the other business type funds. If we move to page 115, the top, you can see expenditure trends. Now, in the Solid Waste Fund, we have a little bit more variation in our operating expenses. Especially, you can see there's some slow growth in contractual services related to landfill operations, as well as more variation in debt service. That debt service is primarily related to changes in how we finance fleet purchases. The solid waste, especially disposal operations, even collection, they have fairly large equipment, right? They have collection trucks, they have crazy scrapers out at the landfill that are really expensive purchases, and we actually finance these with capital leases. And so you'll see some variation in debt service in this fund related to both major fleet acquisitions, as well as if we finance a capital project with debt, when that does occur. Of course, the biggest variation you see, like the other business type funds, is in capital spending. But those two peaks are related to landfill projects because there's not a lot of major infrastructure work going on in solid waste outside of that landfill. The other major capital purchases are primarily for fleet. Moving down the page on 115 a little bit, if you will, City Clerk, I'd like to show you the fund balance trends for this fund. And this is what I have two little exclamation marks on this chart, because if you look at our beginning fund balance in solid waste, it was probably, maybe right around 3.5 million. That was it in 2011.
for all of our solid waste operations, and we have an operating cost of around $2 million. Actually, that $2 million figure, I backed out debt, the current debt, because we didn't have really very much debt in 2010. And so this shows you how few resources we had on hand when we started financial planning. And you can see the need for that major acceleration, because you think about it, we have this landfill, we have these obligations, yet we don't have the fund balance to support it. And so in this fund in particular, I'd like to point that out, because that climb has been really steep, but there's a very good reason for that. When we look at the next column on page 115 at the top, you'll see our disclosure regarding our unassigned fund reserves on hand at the end of fiscal year 2020. It's 5.6 months, in line with the city's policy, and following that, our disclosure regarding the city manager's recommended budget being in balance. We look at the solid waste fund performance in fiscal year 2020. What we see is that total revenue grew by 48.7%. Now, that is not all related to charges for services. Most of that variation is actually due to intergovernmental revenue sources related to the last landfill project. And so what we see in our charges for services is much more modest growth. We see anywhere from between 0.7% to 1.2% growth from the prior year. So all of that would have been in line with our expectations. Similarly, our expenditures were higher than the prior year by about $750,000. That is almost entirely related to capital expenditures, because of course we ramped up on the last phase of that landfill project. In fiscal year 2021, revenue from the four major types of charges for services revenue is exceeding the prior year. A lot of that variance is actually generated by landfill dump fees, because as I understand it, we've had some unusual events this year, like the closure of the Hannah landfill and the cleanup of a train derailment that have caused more than normal waste to be going to the landfill to be disposed of. Our capital projects is kind of a quiet year for capital, wrapping up 2021 in the solid waste fund, but everything is proceeding as planned, with some fleet equipment planned for rebudget into the next year, but most everything going normally. And with that, I would open it up for questions and then pass it to Malia.
Council, the revenue in this fund is, you know, we have 4 rates going on in this fund. We have collection and recycling and disposal, and then the land dump fee for people who are paying at the landfill. And this fund is doing pretty well, and it's steady, kind of like what Jennifer said. I would say that the revenues are pretty steady. If you go down to the bottom, though, there's a couple, you know, we have a lot of, once again, debt issuance, which Jennifer talked about, 1.7 million in loan proceeds. We have some big equipment going on that we're going to be purchasing, and we're going to, like I said, amortize those equipment across the board with loan proceeds and not have our cash go down since rates are pretty low. The other thing I wanted to talk about was the building authority. When we were looking at the Municipal Operations Center, we have created a building authority for bonding and doing major projects. The building authority is separate from the city. We have our board members. They approved the loan for the bond proceeds for this fund, and now we are using those. We're finally getting to the Municipal Operations Center where we will be using those loan funds, and that is, I just wanted to point that out. That's kind of a anomaly this year. I wanted to talk about the rate and the rate study. You know, the rate study came about because we had a requirement to line our landfill and provide liners. You know, we did, you know, do we do regionalization? Do we combine landfills? We went through all that. It came to a decision where our council wanted to keep our landfill, and with that, we had to fund liners and liner projects for each stage. With that, we had to build rates that we could have money available for the liners. And it was pretty quick. Like I had, you know, within 3 or 4 years, we had to have $5 million for a liner. And so this rate increase into the disposal and the ton at the time was probably not that popular, but I think at this point everyone has caught up or passed us, and it's a very stable fund. We have now just as Jennifer said, we have our landfill liners now on progress, and I think we funded it, and we fund our closing and post-closure cost. And with that, it's reviewed every year, and we look at that and say, are we still on track? Would that affect our rates or things that are going on for that? I would say that we are not planning to do a rate study on this solid waste fund. I mean, we have water, wastewater, and storm. Looking at storm, it's kind of a full plate. If I think this fund doesn't need a rate study unless council really wants to change the whole entire recycling program. And if they were going to do that, then I would recommend a rate study to really understand what that would mean for this fund and funding those services. So that would be my comment on this fund for the rates. If anyone has any questions, please let me know.
Thanks, Malia. I don't see any hands. Did I miss any as I'm, oh, looks like the mayor just jumped on, so take it away.
Vice Mayor, thank you so much. And I apologize, everybody had to step away for a little bit. But yeah, right along the same lines, if there's any questions, and I wasn't seeing any either. Everyone's providing us a good overview on all these things. So
I do have a question, but so I remember Waste Management offered materials for educating the public about our recycling. Were those? Can we try taking advantage of that this year to get more information to people? Because I think people are just in general, there aren't many people that know what goes in their recycle can, because I see in my neighborhood when it blows over a lot of things that shouldn't have gone in there. Then I think, well, I'm putting my recycling out, but this whole thing is getting contaminated by people that are putting in plastic bags and things like that. So I would like us to be able to take advantage of their materials. And I see we have a recycling intern in the budget, but I don't know if they charge for their materials. Do you know, Brooks?
Councilor Doherty, we will start working with Waste Management on that more. There are some materials that they won't give because they're their materials, but they will share some with us and they will help us along. I'll be honest with you, the issue we've had is that we're small peanuts to them, right? And so, we will continue to reach out to them and work on that. And we are excited about the marketing intern to help with that education and help us with that public outreach. As I've said before, we're not marketing folks. We're solid waste people. And so I think that's going to be a big help for us, actually, to have that person hopefully help guide us into the future and come up with a good marketing and public relation program.
And may I add, I know that there are several people willing to volunteer and put stickers on cans and things like that. So just bear that in mind. Thanks.
Understood. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else?
We ready to look at expenditures?
I think so.
Okay. Great. We've touched on some of the expenditure already as we've talked about the intern position, but let me give you kind of a broad overview. Starting on page 117 toward the bottom of the page. I am not recommending, nor did the director request, an increase in full-time benefited positions. We have 18 full-time staff in this function and will continue to. But you will see as we move down that I am recommending favorably for the intern position that Public Works has, Solid Waste Division has requested. And the reason for that is articulated mostly on page 117, where you see the council's goals set forth with respect to solid waste and recycling operations. So I'm going to move down to the next page and look at numbers, and then we'll get back to the intern and the duties of that position. So moving to page 118, you can see there are 4 divisions within the Solid Waste Fund. The total budget looks a bit higher that's being recommended in fiscal 22, significantly higher, frankly, at $12.4 million, up from 9.5. I think Jen and Malia both touched on the driving factor behind that, which is some large capital leases for equipment. And those are items that we discussed in the capital and equipment budget work sessions in April, so I know you are familiar with those. If we look down to page 119 at the top and kind of look at our graphs depicting how our expenditures will group by type, you'll see that similar to your other business fund, the water fund, that capital projects or capital leases for large equipment are the primary cost driver for solid waste services, amounting to just about 70% of all money spent in this function. Personnel account for a slightly smaller portion than you saw in the water and wastewater operations, and of course that's proportionate, simply because the water and wastewater operations are a higher denominator, frankly, than in the solid waste fund, but still personnel only being about 10% of all of our operating and maintenance expenditures. Looking at the actual versus budget trends by expenditure type, you can see your actual spending in 2019 fiscal year and in the 2020 fiscal year were lower than what we have budgeted in fiscal 21 and 22, and that is of course being driven by those large capital purchases and some interfund transfers that I believe Jennifer touched on. If you look at the bottom half of page 119, you'll see our centrally budgeted adjustments that I am recommending, and that is amounting to a whole $1,750 for basically business and overhead expenses. And then you see at the top of the next page the fund transfers for capital construction, and those also have been touched upon previously in the financial position discussion and in our capital work sessions last month. So the last thing I would mention with respect to the expenditure is the personnel request. Again, this will not be a full-time benefited or FTE position that we're requesting you to allocate. Instead, we're just asking you to allocate and recommending that you do so about $22,000 or $21,952. Again, fairly low dollar investment, but you would be investing in money, allowing the Public Works Director and the Solid Waste Manager, J.R. Slingerland, who's with us on the call tonight, to hire an intern to work with us to provide marketing and other materials related to our diversion programs, notably recycling, maybe also some of our glass efforts that we are planning for in the capital construction budget and talked about last month. So with that, Brooks and JR, if you would like to add any more detail about the duties of the intern as you envision them, that would be great. I should also mention retail use plastic bags may fall into the hands of this intern, and I'll let Brooks and JR expound further if they'd like to on the personnel intern requests and also highlight goals and accomplishments.
I don't really have anything to add to that, Janine. I think you covered it pretty well. So with that, I'll jump back up to 113, page 113 to hit those accomplishments and goals. The solid waste division is, as everybody knows, the main function is the collection and disposal of solid waste. Also handling all of our recycling services. We service every resident of 2 units or less in the city. And additionally, we provide a commercial service, picking up right now about 300 commercial trash accounts. Some of our accomplishments toward the council goals last year was we began the design for a new household hazardous waste building at the landfill. That is basically at 100% design now. We originally planned to bid that out this summer, but as we discussed previously, because of increased steel costs, we're going to hold off on that and look at that for next summer. Hopefully those prices will come back down on the steel. Solid waste division, myself and the city manager's office worked with multiple groups and organizations within the community to help develop waste reduction plans and programs. And that work continues on with groups, some of those from the university and just local community groups here in town. We increase public information to reduce single stream recycling contamination and to inform residents about recycling options within Laramie, including cooking oil, plastic bags, film, and plastic film and other items. Last year, JR did a great job working with the city clerk to revise our landfill voucher program to an online application process due to the COVID situation, and that process worked out so well. We're continuing that on this year. In fact, I got my voucher today. So that process is working good. Objectives for next year is to continue to research, evaluate, and implement new programs that improve on current programs related to reducing, reusing, recycling, and diverting materials from the landfill. Complete that household hazardous waste building project, and complete the construction of the glass storage and loading area to allow customer drop-off of glass recycling. JR actually called me this morning and let me know that he's spoken with Momentum Glass down in Colorado. And at this point in time, they are willing to pay our entire transportation fee on the glass. So hoping that continues on. So we're moving forward. JR is working on getting the bunker set up and things in place. And plan is to have that in place and have a drop off at the landfill for the residents this summer. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Any questions? Yeah, I see Councilmember Schuster. Go right ahead.
Thank you. On the glass recycling, will we put a large bin up front by the entrance, or will they have to pull in and dump it in a specific area, or have any plans on that yet, or is that still all in limbo?
Yeah, Councilor Schuster, through you, Mayor, that's something we're still discussing, and we, JR, myself, and our landfill supervisor discussed just that, putting a smaller container up front that is easy for the residents to get to, make a quick drop and go, if you will, so they're not having to maneuver through the landfill to get there, and then the bunker would possibly be set up in a different location to where we can store that material and load it without the public kind of in our way, if you will. But yeah, I think that's the plan at this point, is to have a separate container up closer to the front to make it easy drop off for the residents.
Be a charge for it.
Councilor Schuster, through you, Mayor, with Momentum currently picking up the cost on the transportation, we're going to handle the handling on site through our normal operations. So at this point, there will be no charge for it.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Good. Any other questions? We've talked a lot about some of these things, but people have also been able to ask their questions here. So I don't see anything else, so maybe we better keep going.
Okay. Council, then that concludes the Solid Waste Fund. I did want to address what we call other funds in the budget that begin on page 122. Really just to note for you that we have touched on all of the critical funds in our discussions in April and our discussions this week. And the critical funds in my mind are your specific tax funds. They are your E911 fund. They are your Parks and Recreation Development Fund. That's where most of your projects are budgeted by fund that you deal with routinely throughout the year and that we have large projects in. I wanted to touch base briefly because I just didn't want to leave it unaddressed on some of the funds that we haven't discussed. The first one being noted on page 122, which is our Economic Development Fund. And as the name suggests, this is where we budget for our economic development initiatives and programs. It's also where we track revenue coming in from old or previous capital construction projects, such as building the Tri-Hydro headquarters to facilitate their expansion. And as you know, we own and then lease that building to Tri-Hydro, and we reflect their their lease payments coming in within this fund as revenue. We hold these funds hoping that we will have grant match for economic development grants that may come to us in the future. We haven't had any significant grant-funded projects in economic development in the last couple of years, but in the years prior to that, we had many, some, I think, $30 million in economic development grants. And so we retain these funds hoping to use them for economic development projects, and in particular grant matches, where we can maybe expand those dollars by a factor of 2, 3, or 4 times, with a $1 match bringing in maybe 4 or 5, maybe even $10 to the community. So there's an overview on those pages 122 and 23 of our Economic Development Fund, as well as some discussion about the initiatives that we completed in 2020 for COVID, and a lot of that money was appropriated out of the Economic Development Fund. We've mentioned those projects, the Interfaith Food Pantry expansion, as well as the COVID-19 Emergency Relief Program for small businesses that we've been running since Council allocated funds in partnership with Laramie Chamber Business Alliance. So I won't spend much time there because I know we've touched on those as part of our departmental conversation. I'll move to the next fund, which is E911, and just mention that there really is no notable change here. This is where revenue receipts are generated from the surcharge on our telephone bills, and we use E911 funds to support really what I consider major equipment purchases that keep our 911 center functioning. We don't have anything notable this year. You will see in 2021, we completed a rather large project, and the budget is actually smaller. And the expenditure that's being recommended in this fund is much smaller with that project being completed. Moving to our other fund that we've not addressed on page 125, this is our Health Insurance Fund. This is an internal service fund. We use it to account and finance for our employee health insurance, self-insurance program. So you'll see the revenue forecast there and our budgeted expenditures. This fund is in healthy shape, although we're constantly tracking this through the city's health insurance committee to make sure that we maintain this benefit for our employees in perpetuity and at reasonable cost. And then lastly, on page 126, we have the Cemetery Perpetual Care Fund, and it is exactly what it says. It's to provide for care. It's a fiduciary fund that will help us to care for the cemetery, and it is a very small dollar fund, as you can see, with expenditure recommended at only $55,000. The remaining funds on the ensuing pages, as I said, Parks and Rec Development Fund and our specific purpose tax funds, I know that you're very familiar with, and we've covered the expenditures in those extensively as part of the previous conversations we've had. So I won't add anything to that, and would just stand for questions about any of the other funds, as we call them, and I'm happy to answer those, as are our Deputy Director for Administrative Services and our Chief Operating Officer.
Okay. Well, looks like nobody's jumping in. want to say this. I think this year's budget overview and the various presentations have been more like what I would consider the typical budget year, in terms of the way we're able to dig in and sort of go through everything and talk about it, as opposed to last year's, which was kind of done in an emergency mode. And it was sometimes a little bit hard to track. Obviously, we don't want to do the budget over Zoom every year from now on going forward. But this year, I think, was a big improvement. And I think, at least in part, that speaks that together for us in this format. And so we appreciate it. And I think it's probably also partial to, it's also partially due to everybody being a little more used to the video conference format as well. But we do want to acknowledge the time that the staff put in to the presentations for us on every piece of this. And it felt much more like the usual budget presentation in my eyes. And it was able to help, I think, the members of the council, have the understanding that we need, ask the questions that we want, and get those detailed answers from everybody. So thanks a lot. Last chance for questions or a little bit of follow up on this. Not last chance, but last chance for this meeting anyway. All right. Looks like everybody's okay. Malia?
I just wanted to, another notification for you all is, if we're going to have the special meeting on Tuesday, I think we could do it on Tuesday, but just a reminder that staff usually brings adjustments also. We, in between this recommended book and as it's passed, you have people who have brought stuff to council, such as, who got awarded, and you have said to amend the budget. We need to make those amendments in there, and some small adjustments will be done also on that special meeting. And it's kind of a normal thing, but I just wanted to talk about that and remind you that we will be bringing those forth too. Thank you.
Good reminder. Council members, I think that it always is worth repeating that, if you have your own amendment ideas and things you want to do, let's get those together and make sure you get those amendment sheets to the staff folks. The sooner the better. The sooner the better, just so that if there's questions, follow up, or any other information that might help you, that they have adequate time to provide you with that information. It's not a shock to hear that our folks that work for the city are really busy all the time. Part of their job is working on stuff from us, but they also have all these other things going on. So get those in. And I do think there are probably some that are going to be forthcoming. I don't know about how many. I don't think it's going to be a tremendous volume, but I think you'll see some. And so we'll be prepared to have some discussions about that.
Mayor, the Deputy Director circulated the budget amendment worksheet, I guess I would call it, to you all by email last night, so you should have that relatively high up in your inbox from Jennifer Wade.
Yes.
And if you need help preparing budget amendments, I've had a conversation with one counselor today, referred that information to our Chief Operating Officer and Deputy Director, who, if you need to have help or would like assistance in preparing an amendment, they can help you with that, of course, as can I.
All right, council members, you heard it. Councilmember O'Doherty.
I just have some dumb questions that I don't want to waste everybody's time with. Can I address those to Malia? Things about just understanding the debt part, just for my own edification, but I don't want to waste a lot of time. But is it okay if I just ask Malia directly on the side? Thank you.
I don't know why you'd assume that those are dumb questions and the rest of us wouldn't need the same information or answers, but of course you can do whatever you want, Councilmember O'Doherty. Everybody feel like they're in a good space to make decisions about this? And to Councilor O'Doherty's question, right up until we approve this budget, asking questions for information, you can do that. I think actually you can do that year round. It's that amendment piece that's time sensitive that we want you to make sure that you get your stuff in on.
I think it's pretty typical of us to ask questions about the budget all year long. I don't see a lot of people jumping up and down or popping up here to ask anything else. Did I miss anyone? Okay. Well, with that said, and public comment already addressed, and no further indication that we have any public comment for anything, I think we can close the work session. All right. Well, thanks, everybody. Have a good evening.